talking about money is very difficult, and we are typically not taught how to do that growing up in our formative years. We adopt strategies that we saw growing up that we ourselves that have been useful or helpful for us. It is designed to help us stay safe. Sometimes the starting point is just sitting down and talking about what does money mean to you? How does it feel to talk about money? That might actually be for some enough of a conversation and being able to tolerate that. What does sitting down and talk about money feel? One partner might say, this feels really uncomfortable, or I feel really anxious.
Wall Street Podcast, broadcasting live again from Wall Street South, Charlotte, North Carolina. Tonight we're kicking off part one of our two-part exclusive series on the crucial side of wealth that handles 100% of our decisions but rarely gets enough airtime, the psychology of money. And I'm joined by certified financial therapist and behavioral financial expert, Ashley Quamme. Tonight's mission is to shift our focus away from the stock charts and step straight up to the kitchen table. Money is about truth. Money is rarely about the math. It's about the mindset, communication, and human behavior. In part one of our deep dive tonight, Ashley and I are breaking down mindset versus math, why financial friction in relationships is almost never about the numbers, but what money represents below the surface. The money date framework, how busy couples and professionals can schedule high-yield, low-stress financial check-ins, navigating taboo conversations, de-stigmatizing prenups, postnups, and multiple generational wealth transfers, and then macro-driven anxiety, how to filter out noisy media headlines engineered for focus strictly on what you can control. Before we jump into the engine room with Ashley, go ahead and hit that like button. Make sure you subscribe to this channel and drop any questions in the chat that you have now. If you have a partner, go ahead and grab them and come sit down for this one too as well. I have some ways to share, some of those hard financial questions that you may have. And if you haven't had any of these conversations, Ashley gives some great ways to begin the conversation as well. It's going to be a good hour. Thanks for tuning in. Main Street Heart meets Wall Street Smarts. Here we go.
Yep.
Hello, everyone, and welcome live. Whether you're tuning in with us on YouTube, join the conversation on LinkedIn, or streaming live on X, welcome to today's special live event. We talk a lot about market cycles, asset allocation, and building robust portfolios. But today we're diving into a side of wealth that's rarely talked about enough, especially without enough depth, yet handles 100% of the decisions we make. The psychology of money, behavioral finance, and our financial choices impact our most valuable assets, our relationship. Money is rarely about math. It's about mindset, communication, and how we navigate financial decisions as families and partners. To build a truly holistic strategy, we have to look at the Reliant Health right alongside the financial plan. That is why I'm incredibly excited for today's session. We're shifting the focus from the charts straight to the kitchen table to discuss how couples can align their vision, overcome financial friction, and build true wealth together. Joining me today for this breakdown is an absolute expert in the space. She's a highly respected certified financial therapist, a specialist in behavioral financial, and a consultant who's helped individuals, couples, and financial professionals navigate the deeply emotional and relational side of money. So everyone, please help me and welcome to the broadcast, Ashley Quamme. Ashley, it's great to have you here. How are you?
I'm well. Thanks, Marcus, for having me.
Yeah. Just want so excited. I saw you on another live, and I was just excited to have you on here today, so we can just sit back and talk a little bit about the psychology of money, Ashley.
Let's go. Favorite topic. I love it.
Let's go. Where were you tuning in from right now, or calling in from?
Yeah. So I'm located in Augusta, Georgia. So for those of you who are big golf enthusiasts, you may know that there is a small golf tournament that happens there once a year. So in the South, as Marcus, you and I were talking before, I'm from North Carolina originally, and I say currently forced to live in Georgia, hoping one day, someday, I can make my way back up to the Carolinas, where I left my heart.
Where you left your heart. We were talking online as we wait for some people to come on, offline as we wait for people to come in, about your journey. Let's before we get into the what you do and how you do it, let's talk a little bit about how you ended up in Georgia. I thought it was actually kind of fascinating.
Yeah, so I'll take it way back. I met this really cute guy in college. Oh, he was so cute. And fell head over heels in love with him. Um, Decided after we graduated from the Appalachian State University that we would get married and spend the rest of our lives together. And so that we did. Um, Getting down to Georgia was a little bit of a journey. So after college, Clayton had a military commitment that sent him to South Korea, where he was stationed for a few years. I wanted to pursue marriage and family therapy and becoming a clinical therapist. So I went to graduate school down at Valdosta State University in Valdosta, Georgia. After graduation and being separated for the first 2 years of our marriage, which is crazy, I joined him over in South Korea, where I worked for the US Army in the addictions space. At that time, we wrapped up our time in Korea, moved back stateside, and landed on Augusta. Clayton wanted to pursue his CFP hours and becoming certified as a certified financial planner, and also still wanting to remain in the Army Reserves. And there's a military base here, Fort Gordon, was Fort Gordon, now it's Fort Eisenhower. And so we said, hey, this is pretty equidistant between our families. I could continue pursuing my clinical work, becoming licensed, and everything just kind of said, makes sense. Did not anticipate being here 14 years later. I will say that, but here we are. It's a great area. We've, enjoyed it. I don't know if we'll stay here forever, but at least for now, it's been good to us.
Very cool, very cool. So you got Georgia on your mind, right?
I guess so. Yeah.
And they don't even like you're not growing peaches in Augusta, right? Like that's not the peach party, Georgia.
Actually, no, it's not. We get our peaches from South Carolina. Ooh, I feel a little bit like a traitor, but we we cross the border over into South Carolina and we get all our peaches over there. So hopefully, my fellow Georgians don't take too much offense to that.
Yeah, they'll be all right. They'll find something else to take offense to,
I'm
I'm
sure
sure.
they will. I'm sure they will.
Yeah, I had a cousin who went to college down there at Payne College, I believe is the name of it. So
Yeah, yeah. That is I want to say that that is one of the HBCUs. I know here, Morehouse, I know is over in Atlanta, but I believe that Payne is an HBCU here in the Augusta area, downtown. They have a cute little campus in the downtown area.
yeah, it's almost like Boone, because pretty much all of Boone's downtown is well,
It's
not the
very true.
downtown, but part of it is Appalachian State. Like a lot of it is Boone
Yeah,
in there.
very true. Very, very true.
Very true. Before we dig into like actually deeper sets into like mindset and money mindset, tell us a little bit about like what made you decide to like tell us more about your journey. What made you decide that you wanted to help people specifically with the financial side or the psychology side of mindset of money?
Yeah. So I went to school to be a couples therapist. So was licensed as a marriage and family therapist, set out to have my own private practice, which I did for well over a decade, a solo practice where I specialized in meeting with couples and families. That eventually grew into a group practice and that specialized in the same. So, part of that clinical work, though, Marcus, what I noticed over time is that couples would bring a lot of stuff to the couch. For the most part, I felt pretty well equipped just in my training and other certification. Like I felt pretty decent. But there's this one content topic that would come up or come into play that I felt very, very ill equipped for, and that centered around money. So knowing, at the time my husband, well, he still is, but as a financial planner, I would ask him like, hey, this couple is arguing about, this particular like budget item or what to spend on this. Like, how do I help them? And Clayton, was like, I don't know. Like, I don't know. What do the numbers say? Are they overspending? And I'm like, oh, that's not the problem, Clayton. That's not the issue here. And so, with him unfortunately not being able to help me, what do you do when you don't know how to do something? You go to Google, and so I started typing into Google, like, interventions for helping couples in therapy with money related issues. And lo and behold, I discovered financial therapy and just followed that breadcrumb trail of exploring, like, what is this? How do I bring this into my clinical practice? How do I help couples and families who are struggling with money related conversations or deeper issues, maybe around scarcity or abundance? How do I help them navigate that, here in my office? From there, I started to pursue other certification and education. And that led me to Kansas State, where I was in a financial therapy graduate certificate program. And I thought it was going to be full of practitioners, mental health practitioners like myself. It was not. It was full of financial advisors, which was so exciting. Starting to make just connections and relationships. Advisors would say, "Hey, Ashley, like, what should I do about this client? How should I help them here? This client is saying this. This couple is struggling with this. Like, what do you think I should do? Or how should I approach this?" And that really piqued just my interest and curiosity around how can I take what I do and not just help on the client side of things, but how can I also help advisors? How can I help them to feel more confident, more competent? How can I support them? And so that really sparked the journey and where I am now with Beyond the Plan of serving as a fractional chief behavioral officer inside of RIAs, inside of firms, along with other just project work that we do for larger enterprise firms and such. So, being able to serve both like the clients and the advisor, it feels like a win-win for me. It feels like I am helping both parts of the system here of the relationship, being able to serve both ends. So, long-winded kind of explanation for how I got here. Not where I thought I would be, but definitely glad that I trusted my instincts and thoughts and feelings around where to keep and how to keep pursuing.
Got you. Not a long-winded answer. You're fine. Just a well explained one, thoroughly explained. You said this is where did you think you would be right now?
Yeah, I thought I would just be a couples therapist forever, I guess, because I don't, at least from the mental health world, the therapy world, it's, what else do you do? What are those other opportunities for taking that and, making a life, making an income? And so I kind of just thought, like, well, I'll be a couples therapist. Maybe I'll own a group practice. That was about as far as the maybe ambitions went, which I did for a little while, but really found that if I wanted to make a difference and if I wanted to reach more people, I couldn't just be working on the client end. I had to also be helping and serving the people who serve the clients as well. It feels like, just making progress, making a difference at a greater, just exponential rate.
Nice. And so I like picture. Have you ever seen the show Billions?
No, I haven't. Maybe I need to.
It's definitely interesting. It's a show, Andrew Ross Sorkin, like, helped create it, but it's about, like, Wall Street and trading firms, quants. It's really interesting. It's kinda old, like, maybe a decade old now, but
Okay.
they have a psychiatrist in there for the traders, 'cause they do, like, high frequency traders. I just, like, picture you as, like, the psychiatrist, but then who also, like, walks out and trades. Yeah,
Yeah.
you might like that show. I don't know how
I will have to check it out. I will have to check it out.
yeah, I don't know how it's not very family friendly, though.
Oh,
Not
well,
like
I
this
will make sure
podcast.
that it is just me and my husband. That's a date night then.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, it's a date night for sure. It's very interesting. You're watching, you're like, "Oh, wow, okay." It's not a bad one. It's not a bad one. What are some of the things that you and your husband talk about with money?
Um, so on the personal side, like we've always talked about money. One of the things that we do very, very consistently is talk about our goals. And so every year we have a goal planning meeting, and that's something that's evolved. Just, we've been married almost 18 years this month. And so that's evolved from the very beginning, just around what do those goal conversations look like. So we talk about, what are we saving for? Where do we want to be in 3, 5 years? 18 years ago, it was also 10 years. And I guess it still is now at 40, but I'm like, "Ugh, I don't want to talk about 50. That feels like a big number." But we talk about what we're saving for, what's coming up, what are the things that we wanna do, but also what are we spending on? Things that maybe we need to spend on, but some, other parts that maybe we want to. Vacations, trips, investments in careers, things like that. So that is the thing that we consistently do like every year. We have a structure, we have a framework that we do and talk around that. But I don't know if it's good. I don't know if it's healthy. I don't know if it's bad. I don't know where it falls on like the spectrum, but we talk a lot about money. It's a subject that is very strong and is strongly talked about in our marriage. And doesn't mean that there's no tension or friction ever around it, but there's not a fear to address it and to openly say, hey, like, I want to start spending on getting my hair done like every 8 weeks. I want my roots done every 8 weeks. So, fun fact, this is not my natural hair color. I get my
What?
roots done. I know it's probably a shock to everyone, but I get my roots done every 8 weeks. And for some people, that might be like, oh my gosh, that was a discussion that we had because there was a financial impact to it. So, we talk about the small things like getting my roots done with greater frequency, all the way to the larger things like saving for retirement. What kind of lifestyle do we want? When would we may want to stop working? How much do we want to contribute to the kids in their launching into adulthood? So all the way, we run the gamut from big to small things.
Nice. Very good. Very cool. And you say like your thing is getting your roots done every 8 weeks. What's his thing? Golf?
No, no. He likes hunting, and has become more interested in turkey hunting specifically, which I am thrilled for him. I'm so happy for him that he loves it and that he enjoys it. I don't enjoy pulling up the driveway, coming home and a dead turkey hanging from one of our trees, and seeing that. So, uh, there are parts of his hobby that I don't enjoy, but I'm so glad that he has it. So I would say his is primarily hunting, fishing is what he's most into.
Got you. So you don't go out turkey shooting with him?
No, no, no. He has
No.
tried. He's invited me along, but that is not I do not have a strength in being able to sit still or be quiet. And those are two like foundational pieces that if you're going to go hunting, you need to be able to be still for a long period of time and you need to be quiet. And so those are not strengths of mine. So I've declined the invitations.
Ashley talks in her sleep. Like, you gotta keep it moving. So I tell my wife, I'm like, you gotta talk too much sometimes, honey. You're just talking in your sleep.
Yep.
But like, it's interesting. Like, I think people don't realize that every couple has like their things, that they disagree on with money. Me and my wife were having a conversation. I was like, you would get highly upset maybe on some of the things I'll spend money on where it's just like just normal to me. And I would be like, what are you spending so much money on this little thing for? But I gotta say you and your husband are like in the top percentile when it comes to communication and money. What do you generally see with people, especially like we're sitting here talking about the psychology of like the driven anxiety in today's world? What are you seeing when you're speaking with advisors and couples? Because you talk on both sides, correct?
Yeah, yeah, I do. So, what I see a lot of in terms of what brings, for some, like uncertainty or anxiety to life is can be fear, but it's emotions, right? It's fear of uncertainty, fear of the unknown. Our brains don't like threats and they perceive uncertainty or the unknown as a threat. And so when that happens, it gets coded as danger. And then we have a response to that. And the response could be questioning, why are you spending so much money on that? Why are you doing that? It could come across as being, condescending, questioning, judgmental, even if we're looking at how does this manifest like between partners, between in couples, but oftentimes there's a deeper meaning there. There's deeper context. I like to say that couples don't actually fight about money. They just in the sense that like we don't fight over the dishwasher, like how to load dishes in a dishwasher. Like that's not actually what couples fight about. But what they are fighting about or arguing about or where there's tension about is what money means to us, everything below the waters. If you think about an iceberg, what does money mean to you? Where does those feelings come from? Is it tied to your identity? When there are economic shifts, there's market volatility. when there are news cycles, as you have here, that are pretty relentless and pretty scary, like how does that trigger all of our experiences around, how money has played out or impacted our life? If we came up in a family system where things were scarce, to varying maybe degrees, but there was a sense of like not knowing what was coming, or would this all be taken away? And then there's market volatility, right? Let's just kind of, we'll say that more generally. There's some market volatility there. It could lead, a person into holding on to things tighter, to wanting to really buckle down and save more. And so we'll see that in couples, maybe where one partner is, nervous or anxious because there's volatility. And so the only way they know how to manage that is to hold on tighter to their money, to save more. And they can become then critical, right? It could be, hey, Ashley, you really got to cut back on getting your roots done every 8 weeks. Like that's not necessary. Um, when we understand, Marcus, I think where these comments are coming from, when we can understand at more of a macro level, right? Where is this coming from? How is it manifesting? It really does allow couples to be able to navigate those waters more efficiently, and in a way to where they hopefully can come out feeling more connected.
Very interesting. And how do you explain this to clients? Like, so like you said, market volatility, and you said you just kind of summed it up there. But if they turn on the news, depending on whichever source you turn on, there's not the political here on this show, but you're gonna be either scared to death from one side or scared to death from the other side. The world's ending, but we we know that inside this volatility, that's where there's a lot of opportunity for earnings and growth and returns. And if you have a longer time frame, that this is where you're actually going to make like sometimes generational wealth inside these opportunities. How are you explaining those type of things to folks, to your clients?
Yeah, so if we are looking at things such as, we'll take the news, it's a very common one. I like to share that, hey, headlines are engineered for engagement. And like that is the purpose, is so that they get clicks, they get views, they get likes. It's engineered to get your eyeballs on it, regardless of how truthful it is. And so when we have this awareness and realization that, okay, this headline or this news bit here is, wow, like this sounds really awful. It's really terrible. It's really scary. Like, oh my gosh, like what is happening? Like when we realize, like, hey, there are probably parts of this that might be true. There might also be parts of this that are not true. When we understand that it is designed to more often than not evoke fear, then we can make a decision on how much we want to engage, from an emotional place. So I encourage clients, to be mindful just of that, be aware of what headlines and news, what it's trying to do, what is the intent. Sometimes it is to inform, but sometimes it's also to scare you and to get and to get your engagement. And so in those instances, being mindful of how much are you consuming? Do you need to if it's causing a lot of fear and anxiety, maybe we shouldn't be watching the news every night at 9 o'clock. For an hour before bed, if you're having a hard time going to sleep, or if it's leading to arguments with your partner or with family members, like understanding, hey, maybe I shouldn't be consuming that much of it. And maybe I should, kind of back off of it. I like to also tell clients that if we can just when we look and we take everything that's being thrown at us, right? There's a lot. It can be really overwhelming. And if we can shrink that overwhelm, if we could shrink that in a way of understanding and thinking, what can I control? I can't control the markets. I can't control, the headlines and what they say. I can't control this person's actions over here, but I can control, whether we sit down on a Sunday afternoon and look at our actual numbers and look at those projections. I can control reaching out to my advisor and asking a few questions that they can then respond to. So if we can, take that fear, that uncertainty, if we can shrink it in such a way that we focus on what are the things that we can control, It does help to lessen, to decrease the overwhelm, the intensity of the emotion.
Got you. That's a great explanation, the way to break it down. But that seems, in my opinion, that will work for someone who's maybe, not analytical. How would you explain that to like an analytic? Because you didn't give them, if you told them all those things, like with the slide that we have up right now, like, and but with like interest rates, household tensions, and they're seeing these numbers. They know when they go to the gas pump that it costs more than it did in February. But if they look at their portfolio, it's definitely higher than it was in February as well if they stayed investing in the market, right? But they don't see that as well. So how would you break that down? Because I know you have to figure out personalities as well when you're working with people.
Yeah, so it's a great question because you do have those clients, those people who are more analytical or they're just more interested, too. Like they just find the content fascinating, interested. Maybe they're a bit of a DIYer themselves. And so I think that there is something to education and education being helpful and informative that can also that can also decrease anxiety, worry, and fear. And you have to kind of know either yourself, if you're someone listening and you're like, oh, yeah, like I actually need education. I like it when my advisor explains things and breaks it down in such a way because having that knowledge, having that context does help me then in situations where I start to like worry or wonder, right? So I think you have to know yourself or know your client. Education can be helpful. Too much of it may not be. The thing here, I think, to where you want to pay attention to is whether it's having the education, whether it's shrinking the frame of focusing on what we can control is really our behavior. Then what are we doing? So, for example, Marcus, if you're providing a client with that education around what do the numbers show, what's the impact? Okay, yeah, your portfolio is higher, maybe despite the fact that gas prices and you know milk and egg prices are like soaring. Is that changing the behavior, right? Or is that client still then like, well, no, that's not good enough. I still see all of these other things happening and like the what ifs. And even if they are more analytically minded, if the education is not helping how they respond like behaviorally, then I would say that they have probably entered into more of an emotional state, an anxiety state, there, which is possible even for the most like logically minded individuals. They're still human and they still have emotions. And so I think you have to kind of know yourself. But there can also be markers there, points in along the way of knowing, okay, when are we in this more logical like place, and then when are we starting to tread into territory where our emotions are in overdrive and dominating more of our behavior.
Yeah, so you gotta just set them back, frame it. It's a lot about, like you said, the educational piece. So you spend a lot of time educating your clients from the beginning, just as to like your process and what to expect.
Yeah, so I see clients for a wide, like varying, problem sets, all the way from you know, we want to retire. Help us figure out like what are we going to do in retirement? We're not really sure. Should we retire? Should we not? To younger couples who are, you know, professionals, like trying to figure out life, raise kids, and can we go on this vacation or not? So the work, runs really the whole gamut of problem areas, and so there pending the pain point, so the presenting problem, what it is that they're wanting to talk about, to discuss, there is a little bit of education just around, how do you work as an individual? How are you responding? And that education is a bit exploratory because it does require asking some questions around how do you view money? How do you identify with it? How is it tied to the way that you think about yourself? Is it tied to your self-worth? Is it tied to, you feeling like a good person? So there's education in more of an exploratory place. When it comes to emotion regulation, though, so when we're looking at clients who are maybe emotional, um, like disproportionately, then we look at using education on how can we help you to regulate some of these emotions that come with, maybe it's seeing headlines, maybe it's market volatility, maybe it's just being really mad at your husband for, wanting to spend a lot of money on like hunting gear and being gone. for hunting, like pretty much all of April. Not that that's my scenario at all.
Yeah, asking for a friend.
Right, right, right. Yeah, 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 yeah. So a friend tells me.
No, that's and communication is so key, and we just keep coming back to communication and education in this situation. Let's do so. Main Street meets Wall Street. We want to talk about like real life scenarios, real situations. Let's take a scenario maybe here in the world. Young couple, young 30s, getting started, starting a family. They are completely on opposite ends of the spectrum when it comes to money, right? They may go sit down and talk to a financial advisor or a person in an hourly situation, do Dave Ramsey's program, something to that effect, get the advice, go home and change exactly nothing. Where do they actually begin?
Yeah. So talking about money is very difficult, and we are typically not taught how to do that growing up in our formative years. Yeah. Adopt strategies that we saw growing up that we ourselves maybe that have been useful or helpful for us, going back to helping our brains, it is designed to help us stay safe. That's the entire purpose for our brain, is to help us stay safe. And so when we look at where couples start, sometimes the starting point is just sitting down and talking about, what does money mean to you? Like, or how does it feel to talk about money? That might actually be, for some, like, enough of a conversation, right? And being able to like tolerate that. What does sitting down and talk about money feel? One partner might say, "Well, this feels really uncomfortable," or "I feel really anxious." Or one partner, like my husband, when we first started, wanted to talk all about it and show me all the spreadsheets, and was so excited to like walk through all of it. And for myself, it was very overwhelming. Not because I couldn't understand, but because, having a response to something, numbers don't lie, you know, right? And numbers, they're numbers, right? You can't argue with numbers. That's like what I was taught. Like, you can't argue with numbers. It's a number, right? It's fact. But having just kind of my own like response, like just sitting down and like seeing all that can be overwhelming. So for couples, sometimes just talking about, you know, hey, what is it like to talk about money might be a great starting place. So I encourage couples though to schedule regular money dates, and to have regular conversations. Treat it like a meeting, like you would maybe with work. So for Clayton and I, and where I, have seen a lot of success for other couples, particularly those where one or both partners is a professional, is schedule them during the day.
Mm.
Schedule them during like the work day if you can, and treat it almost kind of like that. And the reason I say this is because the last thing that any of us want to do at night is to talk about money, a potentially, conversation that could lead to friction. Like, my brain is fried.
Mhm.
I don't want to engage in that. I just want to zone out, to watch, trashy TV so that I feel good about myself. Like, that's my capacity at the end of the day. As it is, I think, for a lot of younger couples, is particularly those who are raising families. So treat your money date like a working meeting, right? Schedule it if you can during like business hours. Put a time limit on it. This doesn't have to go on forever. Even just 15 to 20 minutes is better
Mm.
than nothing. And what I think is important here is, talking about the numbers, talking about some type of numbers, but also talking about the emotions and the thoughts around it. Um, and what I mean by that is, if we're talking about, let's just say, saving for a vacation, you can talk about the numbers, and one partner might say, like, okay, well, if we're going to save for a vacation, we probably need to be cutting back on these like expenses, right? Sometimes where that conversation can go.
Mhm.
Or if we're going to save for a vacation, we want to allocate like this amount to it, like every month. But the other side of that is, how do we want to feel on vacation? Do we want to be able to, feel relaxed while we're spending on vacation? Do we want to maybe go on a vacation like a sandals resort where you pay everything up front, and then while you're there, you don't have to think about anything, because spending money on vacation causes a lot of stress,
He did sandals.
Yeah, right, yeah, saying or a cruise, right? Like, once you get there, you're kind of there. So, how do we wanna feel on vacation when it comes to money? Do we wanna feel relaxed? What's the impact of that? So I think talking about, both the technical side, but also the emotional, relational side is equally as important when we're having these money dates.
Yeah, money dates. I don't think I've heard anyone put it or describe it as that, and especially having them like in the middle of the day. That's very interesting. So you mentioned having hard conversations, and we're in the world right now. Current events. People are getting married. We're seeing celebrities getting married. Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce just got married, and the talk has been something. Look, you got cited something with a prenup. How would someone, this is going out through LinkedIn and other professional networks, so people may have a need for something like a prenup. How would they bridge a conversation like that?
Yeah, I think prenups get a bad rap. I think that they have, and probably still are, like, just viewed as dooming a relationship to end, is what I hear a lot of clients say. And this is coming from maybe clients who grew up in family systems where a prenup was not like standard practice. So there are certainly families, particularly if you're looking at the high net worth, ultra high net worth space where like prenups are like, I say standard practice, but like they're part of it. Like those families know, like, yeah, you guys can go into this relationship, but prenups will be signed. Like it's common, I guess I could say, within those family systems. But, for others, like, especially if you didn't grow up in that, it can feel like, my gosh, you're, trying to say that our relationship is doomed and that's going to end. There's a lot of emotion behind it. I think there's some mislabeling there. So, talking about prenups is, I think we need to understand first going into that conversation that everyone has their own feelings around it. And while the idea behind a prenup is to, by and large, keep both parties protected, to keep both parties safe, to keep also the assets, the wealth protected. We all have different responses to that. And so it needs to be handled delicately and sensitively. So some of where, I see this come into play might be with parents and their adult children, and they will want their adult child to have a prenup. And, maybe that adult child is like, "Oh, like, we don't need that. She's never going to take me for everything that I've got. We're never divorcing." That might be
Hmm.
true. And no, I'm speaking with some sarcasm here, but that might be true. But that is that
50%
is
people.
that's like what I hear, right? In terms of a response, I think for parents, the conversation needs to start before the actual engagement like happens. So if this is something that you and your partner have maybe potentially an interest in, or maybe for a fact, like, I'm going to want my kids to sign a prenup, like those conversations need to start before, well, in this scenario your son asks someone to marry them. And starting those conversations early sets expectations, but it also allows the opportunity then for your adult child to, decide and make certain choices, and also for you to make certain choices too. I think that prenups can be really wonderful when done right, but I've also seen them cause a lot of harm. And typically that's in families where the conversations have not been handled well. There's been a lot of fear around it, around having the conversation. There's not been enough upfront education, um, or communication around it. So I could talk a lot, Marcus. So I know I'm keep going on and
Keep
on
going.
about it. But I think that, by and large, I think prenups can be incredibly helpful. If you find yourself in a position where it's like, well, we didn't do enough kind of on the front end of talking about prenups, find a professional that can help facilitate a conversation. And there are those professionals out there who do help facilitate conversations and provide education around what a prenup is for both parties. If I'm talking heterosexual couples here. So if you're looking at, let's just say your adult son and his soon to be bride, like, gift them a, meeting with someone who can just help educate them and understand what a prenup is. And maybe that will dispel some of the myths that maybe they have. Um, or maybe it will just further flesh out things that they want to be or go in the prenup, or to ask questions. So, for parents, I think bringing in a professional is is a great way to go, because one, it removes you from the position of, okay, all of this information is coming from, in this scenario, like my future in laws. How can I trust them? They don't have my best interest, you know, at play. But bringing in a professional then allows that person to ask questions to make sure that they are also protected as well.
That's pretty good answer, and I don't think many people actually think about prenups in that way as a useful tool. They just, like you say, hear the word prenup, and then they're just like they just think, they're planning for us to fail. Like 50% of marriages end in divorce, and you want to, be prepared for whatever you may obtain in your marriage. What are some of the best uses you've seen for prenups?
Uh, Best uses.
Outside just, like your common everyday, you keep this, you keep that.
Yeah, I think where when I've seen them go well, some of the best uses, and this is a pre or post nup,
Yeah.
is that it opens up dialogue and communication about money, which is a very taboo subject in and of itself. It's hard to talk about. It's not easy. And so I think, sometimes prenups or postnups, they really force that conversation. They can be the thing that forces us to talk about, like, we got to talk about money now. Okay, here we are. And so when they're done well, it really can be a benefit to just learning how do we talk about money? What does money mean to each of us? What does security look like for each of us and mean? And so I think that that can be truly one of those, unexpected side benefits, is that it really does and can bring a couple together in talking about a really hard subject matter.
Yeah. And what are some of the worst examples, like cases you've seen with like a prenup?
Oh gosh, how much time do we have, Marcus? I feel like we
Expand.
all know like the worst examples and how they've played out, and that's where, albeit the evil in-laws, like, kind of force this or put things in a prenup that the couple wasn't aware of, or have left one spouse high and dry. I think, somewhat kind of jokes aside, where I see harm kind of being done is in a coupleship where, and I'll say for heterosexual couples where the female partner was taking care, maybe home, taking care of kids, gave up a career, gave up a job, gave up, really the ability for her to build her own, path. I have seen then where, prenups can, I'm going to say it this way, it's probably not PG, but screw that person over, essentially leave them high and dry. And so that I think is not okay. And I've seen where then that female part is very resentful, of, I married this person, I trusted this, arrangement and how we had things. And then now, like, I'm left with nothing. And some of that might in part be because in this scenario, maybe the female partner didn't really understand everything that was in the prenup. They didn't fully, or maybe they did fully kind of trust like their partner or those that were advising them. They didn't ask their own questions, and no, truly like no judgment. But that's where I see that things can get really bad. Again, that's why I advocate for bringing in like a professional to do some education, and for both partners to have, an advocate in it, someone that is helping them think through like all the possible scenarios. So on the front end, like, hey, what if you guys have children and one of you wants to stay home? Like, how do you guys want to do that? How do you want to set things up? So, being able to look at what are the worst possible like fears, if you're doing this on the front end, I know I'm deviating a little bit, doing this on the front end, thinking through what are the worst possible fears, and then how do we talk through and talk around that? I think can be immensely helpful in making sure that some of those worst things don't end up ultimately happening.
Great, great explanation. And I really don't have a chance to have conversations about prenups, and we weren't even going to go deep into this. I kind of threw the prenups on Ashley, the fun of live, but it seems like something that you enjoy speaking on. So if you don't mind, we can talk about it just a little bit more. So with prenups, you mentioned the prenup, And then you mentioned the postnuptial agreement, right? So I think in general, prenups before you get married, postnuptial, that's you can do that while you're married or even after you get married or after you get divorced, correct? Do you want to explain
Um,
a little bit more into those or
ooh, so I'm probably not the best at explaining the divorce piece. I do know, like, while you're married.
talk about why you're married then?
Yes, while you're married, you can. So this might come into play if a partner, and I've worked with clients in this capacity where they've received like a sudden windfall, or maybe particularly like an inheritance. So, one partner receives an inheritance from their parents. Maybe it was unexpected, and maybe as part of receiving that inheritance, they want a postnup put in place, and that can be really tricky.
Yeah.
It can bring up a lot there, but that is probably where I, like, more commonly see them is when there's some sort of, inheritance or sudden windfall that's come into play after the fact, after a couple is married, and they want to put things in place legally, in the form of a postnuptial.
Got you. And you speak about once people are married and windfalls and generations of wealth being passed along. Do you think you mentioned bringing in professionals to have conversations with couples? Do you see professionals bring in, you see couples bring in like multi generations to have the professional come in and talk them through the prenup? That's one of the
Yeah.
best ways you would approach that.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm of the mindset that the more the merrier, to some degree, right? But really trying to communicate across generations can be immensely helpful. One from just an awareness place, but also like an education, and modeling like, hey, like we talk about money in this family. Like money is not taboo. It's not like a secret. Like we talk about it. And this is how we talk about it. And it really allows like families, especially those of older generations, to start to model how we go about talking about money, but more than money, like how do we talk about security and freedom? How do we talk about legacy? How do we talk about relationships? How do we talk about philanthropy and giving? All of those things that come into play.
Right. And what we've seen now, and we're in the middle of one of the greatest generational and just wealth transfers in history. It's great to have a woman on here, because there's not a lot of women in the finance industry, or I should say not enough. There are plenty smart, talented women in this industry, but they're not enough that are being seen. You may come across or a husband passes away and the wife has no sense of what's going on, like financially. How do you approach that? Do you get in front of that? And then if you're not ahead of it and it happens, how do you approach it? Like if you just come into the back end of it.
Yeah, I think if you have the ability to be proactive, to say, "Hey, we as a advisory team, we have a couple where the male partner, and this is stereotypically like what happens, the male partner is very engaged. He's the only one that really shows up or participates. Like the female spouse, don't really know much about her. She's got like a few small accounts, but other than that, like, don't really know anything about her. There's an opportunity to be proactive and engage that unengaged spouse more thoughtfully. And there are a lot of strategies for doing that, where a lot of them boil down to is just getting to know her on a human level, connecting with her, finding out more about who she is. If she likes horses, right? Asking her, hey, sending her an email. Did you see the Kentucky Derby? Who are you cheering for? Right? Just trying to kind of, have frequent enough touch points with her, and then inviting her into a conversation of, hey, we're talking about retirement here. And I know your husband, John handles kind of everything, and that's okay. But we're talking about kind of this one piece, and I just would love to hear your thoughts. Would you be willing to jump on a call with me? As an advisory team, I think that there's a way to strategically be proactive to helping to connect with that unengaged spouse, unengaged partner, and when you do that well, when you can do that well, you earn that partner's trust and they learn like, okay, well, even if I don't know a lot about money, I know that Marcus cares about me and I know that he is willing to help me, right? And so when John passes, then it's, well, I really don't know all about this money stuff, but I know John worked with Marcus for a long time and Marcus, I didn't go to all the meetings, but Marcus always checked in on me around Kentucky Derby season and he always asked me at least like once a year like, what vacations I wanted to save for, spend money on, and, asked me to send them pictures. Like that really speaks to clients, right? In a way of I can trust this person, like they are there for me, I can count on them. And they're more likely to stick with you as an advisor. So being proactive is by and large like my preference is how can we be proactive like as quickly as possible. Now, the second part of that is, well, what if you've not been able to and there's a widow that like you're working with and you want to continue the relationship. I think that there are a lot of ways to continue that. First, just educating yourself on the grieving process and widowhood. What does it look like? Because the education is helpful. What you will find in and within that is that it can look different for every person. But just getting some basic education around, grief and, widowhood and how to engage with a client. Kathy Balasek, a dear friend of mine, is fantastic with grief literacy and education, at least for advisors. But understanding what is this client going through and how do I need to approach conversations. Hopefully, my hope would be is initially putting aside first the goal of retaining assets. My hope would be is that we've put that aside and that we're putting the person first and foremost and
Yeah.
making sure that we can be helpful with helping them with any and all of the financial matters that need to be helped with. So, be proactive if we can in engaging those partners. But if we can't, meet them where they are in that human place, educate yourself on grief and widowhood, and focus first on connecting with them as a human in those early stages and those early places.
There you go. Proactivity. I don't know if that's the word. Being proactive is a good way of going about it.
Yeah.
I saw a stat or a headline yesterday that really like threw me off, man. This generation's different. This younger generation, it said that like nearly 50% of adults under 30 lived with their parents last year at some point, up from like 32%. How are you having those conversations with adults and with their parents? Because what we're seeing now is kind of like a prodigal son type thing where parents are also giving their children their inheritance early. I don't know if they're coming back and getting more later, but they're like going into their retirements. I've seen, and these are like not just case studies. I'm talking about like parents having to go back to work just support their children. Like, how are you having these conversations? That seems to be something hard to break because I know with parents and children, it's a hard subject to break.
It
Please.
is. Yeah. I mean, first, just like validating that this is incredibly difficult. It's not what you planned for. And I'll say like there's a grief element to that, I'm sure, right? That many parents, like I try to put myself in their shoes, like there would be some grief in that. And not that it's maybe the child or your adult child's like fault, but just like, hey, this wasn't what we planned for. Like this wasn't how this was supposed to go. And I think it's important to own that and just say, like, this sucks. We didn't plan for this. We didn't want this. And there's some grief here. And acknowledging really like that part first on both sides for the parents, but also the adult children of like, this kind of stinks. I think that where parents can really be of service to their adult kids is going back to connecting them with a professional, connect them with a financial professional. Maybe it's your advisor. I know a lot of advisors now who are doing like young adult education or supporting them in that place of, hey, you've got your first job. Hey, let me like kind of help get you started on mapping out like a few things of where you could be. There are accredited financial counselors that you could connect your adult child to, but you know, having them connect with a professional that can be another source of information, maybe even an accountability partner, or just someone to lean on and ask questions about, it can be a gift. Can be a gift to them. And so I would start that like early on, even maybe while they're in college, maybe last like year or two of college, is connecting them with, some type of financial counselor, financial professional that can help them start to lay the groundwork for, hey, when you graduate, here might be some folks, right, that you can reach out or setting that can help set you up for when you do leave. I just had a conversation recording for my podcast Planning and Beyond with Colby Goodman right before Marcus, you and I jumped on here. And he
Nice.
is a career coach. And so we're starting to see this a lot more too is connecting adult children or even professionals working with career coaches, but connect them with a career coach, like somebody, somebody like a Colby who can help develop some skills for going out and being successful. Going back to what we talked about at the very beginning about figuring out things that you can control. As parents, what really stinks is that, and I've realized this the older like my kids have gotten, is that I have less control over them. And
Never really had any control.
I know. But I used to think that I used to have like a lot more of it. And I don't really like that. But it is true. And so knowing that we really can't control like our kids, especially as they grow to be young adults, but what we can control is maybe offering opportunities for them to meet with professionals that could help set them up for success or, set them up in such a way to where maybe they don't come back. Maybe they don't come back home. Or maybe the plan is for them to live in your home for a set period of time to build up enough savings for a down payment. Or as a parent, if you're looking at how do I help my adult kids? Maybe it's offering, maybe if instead of paying like a bajillion dollars for a Taylor Swift, Travis Kelsey wedding, maybe it's saying, hey, we will actually gift you this money as a down payment for a home.
Mhm.
With housing prices being what they are, like cost of that might be much better, right? Than, getting married in Madison Square Garden, having the Empire State Building light up. I don't know, maybe, maybe not. But I think that there's a lot of thoughtful ways that parents in particular can start to look at helping set their kids up for success, albeit bringing in a professional or, again, down payment like on a home. And you can talk to your advisor about that. Like they are likely a wonderful resource to be able to have those conversations with.
Very good, very good. And once again, I love all the resources you're mentioning from Colby to just different people that you can reach out to and things to find out. Education is a very powerful tool. So we're talking about, the parents. Let's go down to like a generation below, like kind of in our generation, because now we have this sandwich generation where our parents are getting older. We're having to take care of our parents, but we're also having to raise families. And it's not a new phenomenon. We're not the first people to have this happen, but we have the internet. We have ways to put it out and create terms. How would someone in the sandwich generation, approach this for their financial planning? Just from the how do you approach that? Because you deal with the psychological and the financial piece.
Yeah, you're throwing out all the great hard questions. I mean, how do you deal with it? I don't know. Like I don't have like there's not a framework, at least that I'm familiar with. There's not a framework or book that says, if you do it this way, this is what's going to work for you, your family, and your parents. If you're married, like you might be looking at taking care of both sets of parents.
Yep.
And like with grandparents as well. So my grandfather is 91 years old and
Mm,
still lives independently, like in his home, in his house that he's been in for he moved there when I was 10, so like 30 years now. So you might not just be looking at your parents. It might also be participating and taking care of your grandparents
mhm.
as well. So, it's could be multi generations. How do you deal with it? I think first and foremost, if you're married, this needs to be a topic of conversation with your partner. And it has to be something that you talk about. Like, hey, what are we able to do first and foremost from a financial standpoint? Like, what are we able to contribute? And it may not just be financial, it might also be time, might be, mental, might be emotional. I think that there's an opportunity here in looking at if you've not had conversations with your parents. So I'm thinking like our generation, Marcus, like the peanut butter jelly in the sandwich. If we're looking at that, like how can we start to have conversations with our parents? What information do we need to know? Like what policies do they have in place? What does their insurance coverage look like? What type of estate planning have they done? Um, are there any holes there? What are things that you need to know that would be helpful? What's their long-term care plan? I remember a conversation with my dad, like when I asked him about this, and he was
Mm.
so angry. He was so angry because what he thought I was asking is or talking about, and this has been many, many years, is that I just want him to go in a home. Like that I was like, put him
Palliative
away in a nursing home. And, you know, through some choice words that I
care.
I regret on my side. I'm very very passionate. It's like the Puerto Rican, my dad's half Puerto Rican, it's the Puerto Rican like in me, very passionate. We were
How
able.
you say it? You don't have to say the exact words, but don't say the exact words, frame it.
Yeah, well, I'm not gonna say it, but my dad was able to say, and we were able to talk about, like, how my intent and plan in asking about his long-term care plan was to just know what are his wishes, So, at the point in which he's not able to, or my mom, like, physically able to care for themselves, like, what do they want? Like, what are their wishes? And is there anything like that needs to be put in place now? So, like, there's an opportunity, I think, for folks of our generation to start having those conversations with their parents. You don't have to wait for your parents. You're an adult. And that can feel a little strange to be like, oh, I'm an adult and I can actually lead the charge in talking to my parents like about this. And I think if done from a place of care, which now I know regretfully, like learn the hard way how to approach that conversation. But I think if it's done through a place of like, I care about you and I love you and I want to understand like your thoughts around this so that, we can support you. I think it can be a wonderful conversation. And so that should be done. Like if it's not done, I would encourage couples, I would encourage people to start having those conversations, with their parents. And it doesn't have to just be centered around like money, like, well, how much money am I getting? How much money am I leaving? Uh, it doesn't have to be that. You can start with like, hey, what are your wishes? As you approach, kind of even this next milestone, or if you become physically like unable to care for yourself, like what role do you want me to play? In that. And so those can be just wonderful bonding, I think, conversations if done well. But, you ask like, how do you deal with that? I think first and foremost, you can't deal with it until you really know the lay of the land and what you're dealing with. And the lay of the land is really that information on like both sides. What are your parents' wishes? What are also you and your spouse, your partner, like what are you able to take on? And also thinking about, your kids too. Like what do we also want to be able to do to help support and set our kids up for success?
To the education. It
Yeah.
falls back to education and communication. This is good stuff, by the way, too. I really appreciate you just like breaking it down for people. These aren't conversations that we're generally get to have on Main Street. So, but we need to have because we're having them, but not communicating in the proper way. Like you said, when you asked your father about that, what are his plans? You just thought you were ready to put him out the pasture, you
Yeah.
know? Another thing, like, so we would, at a firm that I worked at before, you would call, you have your script, you talk to people. One of the responses is you'll say, how long have you been working there? And they'll say something like 30, 35 years. And you'll say, you got another 30, 35 years in you. And sometimes that hits differently. You know what I mean? Like sometimes you mean like your intention is like 30 or 35 years working there, but they automatically like, they're thinking like, what are you saying? Like in life or what do you mean with 30, 35 years? So
Oh yeah.
and that can trigger different things. That might actually work for the call because they might be like, maybe I need to think about where I'm at. But it's funny to think how it hit your dad. What are your thoughts on Trump account? And we're going to pause right there because that's exactly where you need to draw the line for tonight. Family, we just spent part one unpacking the kitchen table. We talked about why your relationship with money handles 100% of your financial decisions. We covered how to stop fighting over spreadsheets, why you need to schedule money dates during the day, and how to navigate those tough multi generational wealth conversations with both your kids and your parents. I really want to thank Ashley for taking the time and breaking down the exact psychology behind what we need and why we act the way we do when the pressure is on. But listen to me closely. Understand your mindset's only half the battle. And this is part one and part two in this exclusive series. And we're taking everything we just talked about and bringing it straight into the engine room. We're going to break down how to stop some of these self-sabotaging moves into your portfolio when the market gets volatile. We're going to look at the behavioral traps that cause retail investors to panic sell at the bottom. Ashley's going to show us some of the exact mindset strategies to help financial advisors um, and their clients stay disciplined when the headlines are screaming panic. You're not going to want to miss this next session. If you got value out of this broadcast tonight, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment below telling us your biggest takeaway from part one. Are you going to start your midday money dates? Let us know. Make sure your notifications are turned on so you're the first in the room when part two drops. That'll be next week. Just want to thank this community as well. Take a second to thank everyone for this growing community. It's small, but they're dedicated people. We really appreciate everyone who's listening and growing with us. Main Street Meets Wall Street podcast is over 50 episodes. The Wall Street South Journal subscription newsletter has over 1,400 subscribers. So we just want to thank everyone. Main Street Heart meets Wall Street Smarts. We'll talk to you soon.
What I see a lot of in terms of what brings for some, like, uncertainty or anxiety, to life, is can be fear, but it's emotions, right? It's fear, fear of uncertainty, fear of the unknown. Our brains don't like threats, and they perceive uncertainty or the unknown as a threat. And so when that happens, it gets coded as danger, and then we have a response to that. And the response could be questioning, why are you spending so much money on that? Why are you doing that? It could come across as being, condescending, questioning, judgmental.